The cabin pressure had barely stabilized at 35,000 feet when the screaming began. It was not the ordinary crying of a tired toddler or a hungry infant. It was something raw and desperate and bottomless, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than the throat, from a place inside a child that has no words for what it is feeling because words, for this child, had never been an option. Every passenger on Flight 2247 from Chicago to Atlanta heard it. Some shifted in their seats. Some exchanged uncomfortable glances. A few reached for their headphones with the quiet efficiency of people who had decided, in that moment, that this was not their problem. But for Marcus Aldridge, sitting in seat 14A with his 7-year-old son Caleb beside him, there was no escape. There was only his boy, small and trembling and utterly unreachable, pressing his palms flat against the oval window, his body locked in a kind of silent terror that had somehow found its voice in this airless, contained space 35,000 feet above the earth. Marcus was a man who had built his life on control. He had made his first million at 31 through commercial real estate, his second before 35, and by 40 he wore his success the way other men wore cologne, present but not overpowering, noticeable but tasteful. He owned a penthouse in Chicago's Gold Coast, drove a car that cost more than most people's annual salary, and sat on the boards of 2 nonprofits. He was a man who solved problems. He was a man who knew how to walk into a room and change its temperature simply by the steadiness of his presence. And yet here, in row 14 of a commercial aircraft, surrounded by 212 strangers, Marcus Aldridge was completely helpless. Caleb had been born deaf. Not partially, not in the soft, negotiable way where a hearing aid opens a window back to the world of sound. Profoundly, irreversibly deaf, from birth. The doctors had explained it gently the way doctors always explain things gently when there is nothing gentle about what they are saying. Marcus and his wife, Diane, had cried together that night, and then they had dried their tears and done what people with resources do. They researched, they hired specialists, they enrolled Caleb in the best programs, they learned basic sign language, they fought for him on every front with the same relentless energy Marcus had always channeled into building his empire. They gave Caleb everything they could think to give him. What they could not give him was the thing he most needed in this moment, an explanation. Because Caleb did not understand what flying was. He could not hear the reassuring hum of the engines that told the nervous flyer everything was proceeding normally. He could not hear the flight attendant's cheerful announcement that they had reached cruising altitude. He could not hear the soft ambient noise of a cabin full of living, breathing, ordinary people who were not afraid. What he could feel was the sudden drop in his stomach as the plane had climbed, the incomprehensible sensation of the ground disappearing beneath him, and the absolute inability of anything around him to tell him why. His world had simply become a loud, shaking, unknowable thing that was trying to swallow him. Marcus had tried everything in his arsenal. He had signed to Caleb, their shorthand, their private language, but Caleb's eyes were screwed shut, his head turned away, his small hands pressed over his ears as though trying to block out a sound that existed only inside his body. Marcus had placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder, and Caleb had flinched like something wild and cornered. He had held up Caleb's favorite iPad, the one loaded with the drawing apps and the animated shows that usually pulled him out of himself like a magnet pulling iron, and Caleb had batted it sideways without looking at it, and it had fallen to the aisle floor, and Marcus had retrieved it with the careful movements of a man trying very hard not to show the people around him how badly things were falling apart. A flight attendant had come. She was kind, as flight attendants are trained to be kind, and she had crouched in the aisle and spoken to Caleb in the slow, clear voice that well-meaning people sometimes use with children they do not understand, and Marcus had said quietly, "He's deaf. He can't hear you," and she had nodded with practiced compassion and offered a small bag of pretzels, and Caleb had not even acknowledged her existence, and she had risen and retreated with the look of someone who had done what they could. A man 2 rows back had said something sharp under his breath. Marcus heard the word, control, and something that sounded like, parents these days, and Marcus had felt a heat rise in his chest that had nothing to do with the recycled cabin air. He had turned to look at the man, briefly, with the particular stillness of someone who has decided that engaging would cost too much, and then he had turned back to his son. 30 minutes into the flight, Caleb was still in distress. Marcus's tie was loosened, his jacket folded on the empty seat beside him. He had booked the row intentionally, knowing Caleb sometimes needed space. His hands were trembling slightly, though he would never have admitted it. He had tried signing, touching, showing, distracting, breathing slowly in an exaggerated way hoping Caleb would mirror him. Nothing. His son was in a place Marcus could not reach, locked behind a wall that no amount of money or love or determination could breach in this moment. And then, from across the aisle, a small voice said something. Not to Marcus, not to Caleb, to no one in particular, really, or perhaps to the air itself, in the way that very young children sometimes speak, as if testing whether words have weight. The voice belonged to a girl who looked to be about 5 or 6 years old, sitting in the window seat across the aisle. She had thick dark hair pulled into 2 uneven puffs on either side of her head, the kind of hairstyle assembled with love but without a mirror, and she was wearing a yellow dress with a pattern of small white elephants on it. She was looking at Caleb with her chin resting on the armrest, her dark eyes wide and unafraid, studying him with the open, unguarded curiosity that children have not yet learned to disguise as indifference. What she had said, Marcus couldn't quite make it out. He looked across the aisle. Seated next to the girl was a woman, her mother, clearly, sharing the same wide, calm eyes and the same unhurried quality of stillness. She was a tall woman with a natural ease about her, dressed simply, reading a paperback with a creased spine that suggested it had been read before. She looked up when Marcus's eyes found her, and she smiled, not the tight, apologetic smile of someone enduring an inconvenience, but something genuine and unguarded. She wants to know if she can try, the woman said. Her voice was low and warm, carrying just far enough across the aisle to reach him. My daughter. She has a way with kids who are overwhelmed. I don't want to intrude, just say the word and she'll sit right back down. Marcus looked at the girl, then at his son, then back at the girl. What did he have to lose? Please, he said, anything. The woman nodded and said something quietly to her daughter, something Marcus couldn't hear, and the girl slid out of her seat and crossed the narrow aisle with the careful deliberateness of a child who has been taught to move thoughtfully in small spaces. She did not try to touch Caleb. She did not crouch down or make the exaggerated faces of an adult trying to be relatable. She simply sat down in the aisle seat that Marcus quietly vacated for her, and she looked at Caleb, and she waited. She waited for what felt like a long time, long enough for Marcus to wonder if this was going anywhere, long enough for the flight attendant to pass through once more with her cart, glancing briefly at the unusual configuration and saying nothing. Long enough for Caleb's trembling to slow slightly, not because anything had changed, but simply because time had passed and nothing new had hurt him. And then the girl did something extraordinary in its simplicity. She picked up the iPad from the seat beside her, the one Marcus had retrieved from the aisle floor earlier, and she looked at it, and she began to draw on the screen. She did not look at Caleb while she did it. She just drew a sun, simple and round with radiating lines. A cloud. Below the cloud, with careful child's concentration, she drew an airplane. A stick-figure airplane, really, with oval windows and small stubby wings. And then, in one of the windows, she drew a tiny stick figure with a big round head. And in the window next to it, she drew another tiny stick figure. 2 small passengers, side by side, floating above the cloud she had drawn beneath them. Then she held the iPad up so Caleb could see it, if he wanted to. He didn't look at first. His eyes were still pointed at the window, at the white blur of cloud outside, at the incomprehensible distance between himself and the earth he understood. But the girl held it up patiently, the way you hold something out for an animal that is frightened, without pressure, without demand, just an offering suspended in the air between them. And slowly, the way a tide turns so gradually you cannot identify the exact moment of change, Caleb's gaze shifted. He looked at the drawing. His crying did not stop immediately. It tapered, one of those slow decrescendos where the sound retreats in stages, like a storm passing. He looked at the stick-figure airplane above the stick-figure cloud, and something in his face shifted, just slightly, from terror towards something that might have been recognition. The girl pointed to the window, then to the drawing, then to Caleb, then to herself, then to the 2 small figures she had drawn, side by side in their stick-figure airplane. We are in there, she was saying, without words. We are the ones in the windows. We are the people in the airplane above the cloud. Caleb stared at her. He had never, in his 7 years, had another child communicate with him this way, not in sign language, not in spoken words, but in the most fundamental human language there is, the one that existed before all the others, pointing and drawing and here and you and me and look. He reached out and took the iPad from her. He looked at the drawing for a long time. Then he looked at the window. Then at the drawing again. And then, with the slow carefulness of someone piecing together a puzzle that had seemed unsolvable, he picked up the stylus and added something to the picture. A small sun above the airplane. The girl leaned in to look. She smiled, not a triumphant smile, Not the smile of someone who has accomplished a task, but the simple, delighted smile of a child who has just made a friend. She pointed at the sun he had drawn, and then she pointed at the window, at the actual light flooding through it from outside, that impossible high-altitude sunlight that exists above the cloud layer, brilliant and undimmed. Caleb looked at the window. He had not really looked at it until now, he had only been trying to escape it. But he looked now, and he saw what the girl was pointing at, and the sunlight came through the glass and fell across his face, and something in him seemed to exhale. Marcus, who had been standing in the aisle watching this unfold, realized he was pressing the back of his hand against his mouth. He did not know exactly when he had started doing that. He was not a man who cried in public. He was not, if he was honest, a man who cried often in private either. But there was something happening across those two seats that he could not name and could not contain, something about the sight of his son, his unreachable, frightened, isolated son, drawing a son with another child and then looking out the window at the real one, as if the act of drawing it had made the world legible again. The two children spent the next hour like that, drawing, pointing, looking. Caleb showed the girl how to use the drawing app's color selector. He had always been meticulous about color, choosing exactly the right shade with a concentration that reminded Marcus of watching a painter work. The girl showed Caleb something she had in her bag, a small wooden puzzle, the kind with pieces that slot together to form animals. They worked on it together in silence, their heads nearly touching, two children who shared no spoken language and needed none. When the captain announced their descent into Atlanta, Marcus looked across the aisle at the girl's mother. She had put her paperback down and was watching her daughter with an expression Marcus recognized from his own face in mirrors when Caleb did something that surprised him with its beauty. How did she know to do that? Marcus asked. His voice was not entirely steady. The woman looked at him with those calm, wide eyes. She has a cousin who's autistic, she said. He communicates differently. She learned early that you don't always need the same language to reach someone. You just need to pay attention to what they're showing you, and meet them there. Marcus looked at his son, who was still bent over the puzzle with the girl, methodically fitting a wooden giraffe together piece by piece. I've been trying to reach him for 40 minutes, he said. I have therapists, specialists, programs. I have everything. He paused. She just sat down and drew a picture. The woman smiled gently. Sometimes everything is the problem, she said. Sometimes one small thing is enough. The wheels touched the tarmac in Atlanta with the usual jolt and rush of reverse thrust, and Caleb, who had once gripped Marcus's arm in white-knuckled terror at the very same sensation on a flight 2 years ago, looked up from the puzzle briefly, registered what was happening, and looked back down. He fit the last piece of the giraffe into place and held it up to show the girl. She clapped twice, quietly, and he did something Marcus had not seen him do with another child before. He smiled, not the polite smile he sometimes produced when adults expected it of him. His real smile, the one that came from somewhere unguarded, that changed the whole geography of his face, that made him look completely and utterly like himself. At the gate, while people rose and gathered their bags in the usual shuffling cascade, Marcus crouched beside the girl. He spoke to her directly, looking her in the eyes. Thank you, he said. What you did today, that was something very special. She considered this seriously, the way children consider things that adults mean. He just needed to know what the cloud looked like from the inside, she said, as if this were obvious. And then she reached into her small backpack and produced a second wooden puzzle, a lion this time, and held it out to him. He can have this one. For the next time he flies. Marcus took the lion puzzle with both hands. He found the woman. Her name was Renee, she told him, and her daughter was called Zora, in the baggage claim. He had a business card in his wallet, as he always did, and he gave it to her, and he said what people sometimes say in airports after something unexpected has passed between strangers, that he hoped they would stay in touch. He knew those words usually dissolved the moment the automatic doors slid open and the ordinary world rushed back in. But he meant it in a way he had not meant many things in a long time. On the drive from the airport to his mother's house, the reason for the trip, a family dinner, the comfortable rhythms of people who have known each other their whole lives, Caleb sat in the back seat with the lion puzzle in his lap, fitting and refitting the pieces. He did not seem to need to go anywhere with it. He just seemed to find comfort in the process of assembling something that had been taken apart. Marcus watched him in the rearview mirror at a red light. He thought about what Renee had said. Sometimes everything is the problem. Sometimes one small thing is enough. He had given Caleb everything he could think of, specialists and programs and resources and love in the enormous, expensive, effortful way that men like Marcus tend to express love, through provision, through problem solving, through the relentless accumulation of solutions. And all of it was real. All of it mattered. He would never stop fighting for his son on every front he could identify. But today a 5-year-old girl with uneven hair puffs and a yellow elephant dress had sat down beside his son with an iPad and drawn a stick figure airplane above a stick figure cloud, and she had pointed from the picture to the window and back again, and she had simply said, "Look, we are here, and it is okay, and the sun is right there on the other side of what frightened you." And Caleb had looked. That was the whole miracle. That was all of it. Not a cure, not a breakthrough that erased the complexity of his son's experience in the world. Just a moment of connection across a difference that most people, in most situations, found too wide to cross. Just a child who looked at another child and saw, past all the obvious differences, the thing that was exactly the same, the need to understand where you were, and to know that someone else was there with you. Marcus pulled into his mother's driveway. Through the front window, he could see the warm light of the kitchen, the shape of people moving around, the ordinary beautiful accumulation of his family. He turned off the engine. In the back seat, Caleb had completed the lion and was holding it up to look at it, turning it slowly in the last light of the afternoon. Marcus did not rush him. He just sat, and watched, and waited, the way the girl named Zora had waited, without pressure, without demand, just present, just there, for as long as his son needed. After a moment, Caleb looked up and caught his father's eyes in the mirror. He signed something, the shorthand they had built together over 7 years, their private architecture of gestures. It meant, "I'm ready." Marcus signed back, "Me too." And they went inside. If this story moved you, leave a comment below about a moment when a stranger's small kindness changed everything, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one.